Before I go any further, take a breath, and if this story grabs you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're new. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. My name is Gerald Holt. I'm 67, a retired county fire marshal from Savannah, Georgia. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how the most dangerous thing I ever faced wasn't a burning building. It was the woman living under my roof. It started on a Tuesday in late October. My daughter-in-law, Diane, was leaving for a 10-day pharmaceutical conference in Phoenix. Cream-colored luggage lined up by the door, each bag tagged with gold initials, DCH, Diane Carol Holt. She'd taken my son's last name like she'd taken everything else that belonged to him. My son Caleb was 42. 6 years earlier, he'd been a high school football coach, the kind of man who commanded 60 teenage boys with nothing but a steady stare. 4 regional championships. Then a truck ran a red light on Highway 17 and caught his driver's door at 50 miles an hour. His spinal cord was compressed, not severed, at T10. The ER doctor used the word temporary. 12 to 18 months of rehab, he said, and Caleb could walk again. That was the last time anyone used the word temporary. Diane took control within 72 hours. She flew in a specialist from Atlanta, a Dr. Emmett Fairclough, who spoke with her privately for 20 minutes, and then told me, with practiced sorrow, that the damage was permanent. I believed him. I was a retired fire marshal, not a neurologist. I moved into their guest room that same month. For 6 years I woke at 6 every morning to lift my son from his bed into his chair, while Diane prepared his breakfast with theatrical devotion, grinding his medication into his orange juice every single morning, with that same gentle smile. He was foggy by 9, exhausted by noon, asleep by 8. I thought it was the injury. I thought it was grief. The morning Diane left for Phoenix, the house went quiet in a way it hadn't in years. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, planning nothing more than an afternoon on the back porch with my son. At 7:43, I heard something wrong, not the soft roll of his wheelchair, something heavier. A shoulder against the wall. I moved toward it fast, 30 years of fire investigation trained into my legs. Caleb was standing, both palms flat against the wall, arms shaking like overloaded beams, legs I'd lifted and strapped into footrests for 2,190 straight days, bent and trembling, but holding him up. "Dad," he rasped, "we have to go, right now, before it wears off." I got my arm under his shoulder. We made it down the hall in 3 grinding minutes. I got him into my truck and sat there, hands on the wheel, and asked him to tell me everything. He talked for 40 minutes. The original prognosis had been right, 12 to 18 months, full recovery. Diane had known that before Fairclough ever set foot in the hospital. She'd been in contact with him for 3 weeks before the accident even happened. Caleb had found the proof 18 months ago, buried in a shared cloud folder. Emails, wire transfers, his own name in the subject line of a message from an insurance brokerage he'd never heard of. He said nothing. He was too drugged to trust his own mind. So he waited. 23 days ago, he started holding his morning medication under his tongue and spitting it into the bathroom drain. At night, while Diane slept, he dragged himself to the floor and forced his legs to bear weight, inch by inch, rebuilding 6 years of atrophy in the dark. He'd been waiting for the 1 week she'd finally leave the house. I asked where we needed to go. A storage facility on the east side of Savannah, Unit 34B. Diane had a key on her keyring she didn't know he'd duplicated 3 months earlier, during one clear-headed afternoon. Inside the unit, 11 file boxes, stacked neat, and a fireproof safe the size of a small refrigerator. Caleb knew the combination. What I found inside rewrote everything I understood about the last 6 years. Caleb's accident had produced a $9 million civil judgment against the truck driver. Diane told the whole family it was locked in an untouchable medical trust. She'd shown paperwork. She'd cried explaining it. The trust didn't exist. The money had moved through 3 LLCs across 3 states over 2 years. Commercial real estate, 2 vacation rentals in South Carolina, a 40% stake in an Augusta clinic. She'd built a business empire on my paralyzed son's settlement while I spoon-fed him breakfast every morning for 6 years. The second box held insurance policies. 4 of them. 3 life insurance policies on Caleb, all naming Diane sole beneficiary, combined payout over $6 million. The fourth was different. A disability policy with an accelerated death benefit, paying a lump sum on a terminal diagnosis. Clipped to it, an email from Dr. Fairclough, sent 4 days before Diane left for Phoenix. Everything is prepared on my end. Diagnosis documentation finalized upon your confirmation. Cause: progressive neurological deterioration, untreatable. Timeline: 6 to 8 weeks. Let me know when you want to proceed. I read it 4 times. Then I looked at my son. She's not coming back from a conference, I said. No, he said. She's not. My first instinct was to call the police, lay everything on a detective's desk. But 30 years in fire investigation teaches you something about evidence. It's only as strong as who's holding it. Diane had medical power of attorney. Her attorney would produce Fairclough's credentials, a story about a grief-stricken father inventing conspiracies to cope, about a man who was supposed to be paralyzed, suddenly walking and accusing his caregiver. The system would look at Caleb and see exactly what Diane had designed, an unstable patient contradicting his own medical file. We needed her caught in the act. I drove home and spent 4 hours doing what I know how to do, getting ahead of the fire before it starts. I ran 2 of my dash cameras, high-definition units from my investigation kit, one hidden in the kitchen vent facing the counter where Diane prepared Caleb's medication, one in the hallway smoke detector housing, both synced to a cloud server through my personal hotspot, bypassing the house network entirely. If she cut the internet, the footage would still upload. Then Caleb and I planned it out like a game film. He'd sit in his chair, take whatever she gave him, and not swallow. I'd be reading in my armchair, unremarkable, the same tired old man she'd dismissed for 6 years. She came back a day early, 11:47 at night, dove gray travel jacket, cream luggage. Before she even said hello, her eyes went straight to the kitchen counter, to Caleb's pill organizer. 30 years of investigation taught me this. What a person looks at first tells you what's really on their mind. She smiled, said the conference ended early, some reorganization in her division. She looked rested, bright-eyed, like a woman who'd finished something, not interrupted it. That night, from my room, I listened through an earpiece to the audio feed. At 12:30 a.m., Diane sat on her bed and made a call on a phone I'd never seen, a prepaid burner. My hallway microphone pulled her voice clean through the wall. She said she was back early. Everything was in position. She needed documentation ready by Friday. Then, let's just get it done. I've waited long enough. I didn't sleep. At 4 a.m. I drove 40 minutes to the federal building on Bull Street. I'd worked with the FBI's Savannah resident agency twice before on arson insurance cases. Special Agent Carla Desmond listened to my recording twice, then called her supervisor at home. 2 hours later, in a windowless room with 3 agents, I laid out the whole architecture. The settlement, the LLCs, the policies, the Fairclough email, the burner call. Supervisory Agent Broward told me his office had spent 14 months investigating a network of doctors manufacturing false diagnoses for insurance fraud. They had financial patterns, suspicious death records. What they hadn't had was a direct recorded confirmation of intent between the doctor and beneficiary before the act. My recording came close, but get it done, and I've waited long enough, weren't a confession a good defense attorney couldn't twist into ambiguity. Then Broward asked the hardest thing anyone's ever asked me. I had to go home, let her proceed far enough to actually commit the act. Agents would have the house surrounded, a medical unit staged nearby, but I couldn't intervene until she administered whatever she'd prepared. They needed it caught, on record, in progress. I've pulled bodies out of buildings. I've told parents their kids weren't coming home. Nothing was harder than driving home that morning, knowing what I had to let happen. The next day and a half moved strange, too slow and too fast at once. Diane moved through the house focused, warm, chatting about Phoenix weather. I poured her coffee and asked the right questions and waited. Friday evening, she went to the pantry and came out with a small nylon case I'd never seen. She unzipped it at the counter, back half-turned. Not a pill organizer, a vial, a syringe. She carried it into the living room, knelt by Caleb's chair, and her voice dropped into that soft register she used for cameras and company. "Sweetheart," she said. "Time for his evening treatment. Something to help him rest." I sat with my book open, gripping the pages, and didn't move. She reached for the IV port she'd had installed through a home health order 3 months earlier. One more piece of infrastructure, quietly placed, for exactly this moment. She uncapped the needle. The front door came off its hinges. 3 agents in tactical vests were through the opening in under 2 seconds. Diane lurched backward. The syringe hit the floor and skidded under the coffee table. 2 agents had her cuffed before she could compose her face into something innocent. She looked at me with pure, cold contempt. Not anger, not betrayal. Contempt. Like a contractor annoyed at being caught cutting corners. She said nothing. She had nothing left that would work on me. They walked her out through the broken doorway. I crossed to my son. He grabbed my wrist the way a man grabs something when he's afraid of what he'll do if he lets go. "She's gone," I told him. He nodded, jaw locked, shaking, but present, completely present. Dr. Fairclough was arrested at his Atlanta practice within the hour. 2 more people in his fraud network were picked up before morning. Diane was charged federally: attempted murder, insurance fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment. Her attorney filed the expected motions. None of them landed: the recordings, the documents. And Fairclough's cooperation agreement made her defense mostly theater. 14 months later, she was convicted on every count. 38 years, no early release. I sat in the 3rd row and watched the bailiff walk her out. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Nothing. The clean, empty nothing of something finally being finished. Recovery wasn't fast, and I won't pretend it was. 3 months before Caleb walked the hallway unassisted. 6 months before stairs. A year before he went back to the high school. Not to coach yet, just to sit in the bleachers and watch his old assistant run a Friday night game. At halftime, 32 players climbed up into the stands and stood around him, not sure what to say. Caleb looked at them and said, "Boys, it's good to be back." They won by 2 touchdowns. 30 years of fire investigation taught me one thing that never changes. The most destructive fires don't start loud. They start in the walls, in the hidden spaces, burning silently while everything on the surface looks fine. The people who hurt you most are rarely the ones you don't trust. They're almost always the ones you trust completely. A loving caregiver does not isolate you. A devoted partner does not require your helplessness to function. Trust your gut, even when every credential and every smile in the room is telling you you're wrong. And if you ever find yourself living inside someone else's careful design, know that the truth has a way of finding its own exit, even when every door's been locked. Has someone you trusted turned out to be someone else entirely? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this stayed with you, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.